The Mississippi State football team has wrapped up their spring practice with their spring game being this past Saturday. And I want to get into the quarterback competition that's going on because, as Mike Leach said after the game, it is wide open. And going into the game, people probably thought, and me included, that Will Rogers was the favorite, and maybe he still is the favorite. But I think after the game, Mike Leach's comments are telling about what the quarterback competition actually looks like between him and Jack Abraham. I know there are other quarterbacks there and other quarterbacks played in the spring game, but I think it comes down between Will Rogers and Jack Abraham. But before we get into the quotes from Mike Leach and before we dive into some of the highlights from the actual spring game that we're going to talk about, I want to just kind of plug our channel real quick and encourage you to consider subscribing to us if you like any quarterback-related content, film breakdowns, quarterback interviews, quarterback competitions like what we have here, or how we screen and assess quarterbacks. Pretty much any quarterback-related topic is fair game for us. So just consider giving us a subscription and like the video, comment, all that fancy stuff YouTube people say. Okay, enough of that. Let's dive into the actual video. So Mike Leach's comments after the spring game this past Saturday about the quarterback position was this: I think the quarterback position is wide open. We channeled more reps to Will because he was performing better early in the spring game. But whoever can move the ball downfield the best is who can ever move the ball downfield the best is in the end going to be the quarterback here. So it was a fair guess to assume that Rogers was the favorite going into spring camp, especially with how he finished the season, his freshman season, and then Jack Abraham being the transfer from Southern Miss, who put up great numbers at Southern Miss. But now it looks like the quarterback competition is a lot closer than people probably originally thought. And this was the first time most fans got to see Jack Abraham. They saw his accuracy downfield and just his kind of experience that he has kind of transferred over. And I think he's able to kind of regurgitate information pretty well, especially him being in college for so long and so many different offenses at Southern Miss. And real quick, if you haven't seen our video comparing Will Rogers and Jack Abraham and their game film from the past year, go ahead and check that out. I'll link it below. But that video is actually kind of a more in-depth dive of the quarterback competition and what each quarterback brings to the table. But as we saw in the spring game and what we heard from Mike Leach after, he was not too happy and too pleased with the offense's performance. And again, it's a spring game. You don't want to take too much. You don't want to put too much stock into what happened in the spring game. But you would have liked to see more probably from Will Rogers being his. It's his first spring game, but you would like to see more of him, especially with him being in the offense for as long as he has been now, close to a year or so. But again, it's a spring game. Don't put too much stock into it. But I want to dive into some of the highlights from the actual spring game. We're going to watch Will Rogers and Jack Abraham and just kind of, I combined both highlights of them, so it's not just one or the other, it's just kind of them mixed in. And at the end of the highlights, we will see kind of some of the mistakes that were made and kind of just to give us a better picture of how the game actually was played. And of course, you can find the full game on YouTube somewhere, I'm sure. But enough of me talking. Let's dive into some of the highlights, and then we'll come back at the end of the video, talk about it, and we'll see like who we think is going to be the starting quarterback and kind of what each guy brings to the table. Again, that video is in the link below. Check it out if you aren't familiar with it. But let's dive into the film and then catch up at the end of the video. So again, just a few highlights and a few clips that show the struggles of the quarterbacks from the spring game. I just wanted to kind of put that out there so y'all can decide who y'all thought looked better. Y'all can decide, who you think is leading the competition. I still think Will Rogers is probably his job to lose, I think. But at the same time, it's very telling that Mike Leach said the competition is wide open. And Jack Abraham is someone that we've covered a decent amount as we've done a lot of group of 5 quarterback film breakdowns. And he's someone who's extremely accurate, had a lot of success at Southern Miss under a lot of different offensive coordinators. And so it's not surprising that he comes in and has a good spring game, shows accuracy down the field. After that first drive, he was really able to kind of settle in, have a few good drives back-to-back with a few good touchdown passes, as we saw. Will Rogers, on the other hand, kind of had at least a rough first half, kind of a rough spring game in general, but especially a rough first half with the backwards lateral, that was returned back for a touchdown, and then the interceptions. Also had several other throws that could have been picked off, especially on the first drive, I believe. Yes, the first drive, actually. But at the same time, he finished the half strong. You saw his ability to push the ball downfield and get some pick up yards and chunks as they were able to score right before the half. And I don't put a ton of stock into Will Rogers' performance in the spring game for the simple fact the end of the year he had last year, those end of the year games are more valuable than how he played in the spring game. So those are kind of the takeaways from it. Again, Abraham probably looked a little better than Will Rogers, but at the same time, it wasn't like anyone blew anyone out of the water. So I think the competition, like Leach said, is wide open. Rogers still is probably the favorite just because he started last year. But Abraham is right there. It's going to be even. I would expect this battle to go late into fall camp. But I think whoever ends up winning the competition and winning the starting spot, I think that we're going to see some good play at the quarterback position, especially with Mike Leach being his second year at Mississippi State. So again, we'll come back to the Mississippi State quarterback battle at some point this summer and at some point before the beginning of the season. But this is kind of part 2 of the Mississippi State quarterback battle for us. Again, I'll link the more more detailed, more in-depth breakdown below if you want to go back and watch the comparison. This was just the spring kind of highlights, if you will, but it's good to touch on and talk about. So we will see you next time for our next quarterback competition breakdown. Again, if you like this video, consider subscribing, liking, comment, all that stuff, and we'll see you next time.